Hey guys, this is Calm. I'm here with Fusion. We're doing the ninth round of the World Championship 2013 match between Anand and Carlsen. It's currently 5-3 to Carlsen, and Anand has white in this game. This is potentially his second last white, depending on results, assuming everything is a draw. So he's going to really have to push hard with this white, I think, to try and get something more out of the game compared to the last couple previous.
Yep, in the last few games we've had a bunch of Roy Lopez's, and hasn't worked out well for him.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that he should maybe deviate away from e4, just because Magnus seems so solid on both sides of e4, e5. Maybe play a d4, or maybe play a different line after e4. But yeah.
Let's have a look, shall we? The first move is d4.
Okay.
Never has the world been more excited to see one d4.
I am doing this commentary blind again, by the way, so forgive me if I miss anything. d4.
Yeah, I watched the last half.
Okay. So you missed the opening as well, so...
Okay. Yeah. Knight f6.
Okay.
c4. e6. Knight c3 and bishop b4. So we've got here a Nimzo.
Nimzo Indian's very solid opening. You can play it many solid ways, so it doesn't surprise me that Carlsen's going for this. But I do rate Anand's chances as better here than in the Rai Lopez, to be honest. Because I think there are many tactical lines you can go down, essentially, where you have like imbalanced pawn structures on the c-file and things like that.
So what would you play here for white?
I think most common, or at least it used to be when I was playing this as black, is queen c2 here, but the other moves are knight f3, a3, e3, f3, basically. All of which are pretty much fine. There's some which are more common than others. I say queen c2 is the most common, then probably knight f3 and e3, and then you see a3 and f3 less often, just because I don't think they're quite as solid from white's point of view. They're more kind of risky, although a3 and e3 can generally transpose. Yeah.
So, considering the match situation with Anand 5 for 3 down, this move is probably the best choice out of those.
So this is like the same-ish variation. I tried this a couple of times with white on the board, but it looks better than it is for white, because you gain a lot of space and they don't have so many squares. But then I was finding, as I was playing better players, that they actually don't need that much space. They can still develop normally. They put the queen on e7 and castle, and they slowly break away with c5 or d5, and yeah. But what it will lead to is a very imbalanced game. I imagine Carlsen's going to take on c3 at some point, and especially if he plays it with c5 rather than d5, you'll get big holes along the dark squares for white. Or if he plays it with d5, he can get some like big expansion on the king side and some king side attack.
What did you call the variation?
I think it's the same-ish variation.
Or the sandwich? Or sandwich?
Maybe.
Tasty.
I don't know. The f3 is usually the same-ish variation in like every opening, like King's Indian and so on.
Alright. Okay, so d5 is played.
Okay. So, yeah.
a3, and he takes the knight. So, yeah, I don't really know anything about this opening at all.
This is all kind of theory, I think. Generally you play d5 and c5 just to contest for space in the middle, and you usually want to keep a pawn on d5 rather than take on c4 at any point, because you don't really want white to play e4 and be able to play that and gain so much space. But Magnus will just be looking to develop and so on, I think, here.
So it takes on d5.
Yes, I mean you have options here, but as I say, pawn takes is probably the most logical to keep central space.
And e3 played.
Yeah, You kind of need to play e4 in a slow manner, because you need to play bishop d3 first before you can support it. And actually this c4 move from Magnus works quite well, because obviously it prevents that bishop d3, so it's not necessarily great for black. In terms of it leaves his d5 pawn open to a counterattack later on with e4, because c4 will be weak then. But it does mean that, in the short term at least, white will find it harder to develop, or at least put the pieces on squares he wants. Like, for example, if you look at his knight on g1, generally you would develop that to, e2, but here you block the bishop. So you kind of have the options here. I think even g4 was a line at some point, but then I think immediate h5 is quite strong, so it's it's going to be a slower development than Anand would ideally have, although he must of course be expecting this, playing this opening at a high level.
Yeah, I imagine they have their own home-cooked variations, which they spent a long time on. Must be difficult to have so many openings in your head. I can't really imagine having such a deep repertoire and wide as well.
But then you look at like all the other players over 2700, and they're pretty much all the same. No one really plays the same opening every time now. So I guess that's just because of computers, really, because you can really prepare if someone only plays one opening really deeply.
Yeah, I guess so. So knight c6, and then g4, very nice move.
Okay.
Well, I like it anyway.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this expecting it last move, but maybe this is better actually, because the knight's already on e2, so you can bring it to g3 a bit quicker. So yeah, that was probably the correct variation, and I probably misspoke based on the last move, but it's obviously very aggressive. It prevents bishop f5, it's allow queen c2 to have that really long diagonal, and obviously after knight g3 you have options of pushing the g-pawn or also supporting the g-pawn, and then pushing e4, so you're going to have a lot of space here, but Magnus is going to have his compensation in the fact that white's king is going to have very little cover.
Yep, let's compare to the black king, which is nice and snuggly in its base.
I think this is a much better opening choice from Anand, though, given the match situation, compared to the previous games we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps the computers might prefer black a little bit, but as a human playing this kind of opening, it's a much better choice. Even if it's a bit more risky, because then there's greater chances for mistakes. So the bishop shot comes to g2, which I guess is another point of g4.
Yeah, that'll help with e4 later as well. I guess he just feels that, well, I mean, this probably is the best square for the bishop, because obviously the pawn on c4 is not moving anytime soon, and putting on e2 is kind of, I feel like that is less useful than g2.
So knight comes to a5. I guess eyeing up b3.
I mean, the thing is, when you're defending, one of the main strategies is just to trade off as many pieces as possible. So when he can threaten to do something like knight b3 to trade off the c1 bishop, he will be getting rid of some of the attacking potential, even though that bishop doesn't seem to do much right now. To play against that, it's awkward for Magnus, because obviously his rook's going to be attacked as well, so he'd have to put his bishop on something like b2 where it can't be taken. So it's somewhat awkward, I think, to deal with, so it's probably a good idea for Magnus to play this.
White decides to just castle anyway, and the knight does come into b3, so he's kind of just not worried about it. Can't really do much about it.
Knight b3, yeah, I mean, it's obviously the most consistent move based on knight a5, so that makes sense. I guess you can argue that the dark square bishop also is not as important long term as the light squared one for Vichy, because our pawns are on dark squares, whereas the pawns in the centre for black are on light squares. So if we're in some kind of endgame, we'd want the bishop that can attack black's pawns as opposed to the ones that's blocked behind our own.
Rook a2. And then b5. Okay, so now the knight comes to g3. It's already quite a sharp position. Nice. It's kind of double-edged. It's not exactly safe, is it, with all the pawns?
No, to be honest, it's quite interesting that Magnus is playing this b5 plan, because that implies to me that he's going for like counterplay with a quick a5 and b4 kind of thing, which is, very common in positions like the Sicilian or whatever. But in positions like this, you wonder whether it works quite the same. I mean, b5 can be useful in that you can play bishop b7 anyway, which helps to stop the e4 push, and you can argue that the bishop doesn't have much future along its current diagonal anyway, because it can be pushed away with f4, f5 if it goes to e6, for example. That said, he is, away from his king quite a bit, and there are a lot of pawns currently moving towards him, so I don't know if he had other options, but this certainly looks like the most interesting option, as in, I think this is going to kind of explode somehow.
And a5, natural continuation. I think in my database, this is for novelty, but I mean, who cares,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, I wasn't really. I mean, since g4, I would expect it's quite rare.
Quite rare, yeah. So g5. Let's get moving. Knight e8.
Yeah, I mean, the knight has to go back somewhere, and probably here is slightly better because, one, it doesn't block the bishop on c8, and two, I think in the future it might be useful to play g6 and knight g7, just to like protect the f5 square against the f-pawn pushes, maybe. And although Magnus hasn't taken the c1 bishop yet, I feel like if white is to play e4 now, protecting the g5 pawn via his bishop, he can kind of trade that off now and not worry about that bishop coming into the game later.
So yeah, e4 takes and then takes.
Yeah. I do kind of like Vichy's position at the moment. Maybe it's just visually, but it seems like black's gonna have some little issues. I mean, if you just play even simply rook b2, like b5 is under attack, and then obviously we've got these huge pawns coming through. If we push f4, or we take on d5 and then push f4, obviously that bishop is skewering the queen and the rook, so it's going to require, I think, careful play in a lot of positions from Magnus, whereas I think Anand's plan is more simple, and maybe it's just more, kind of caveman style, but it's, it can be very effective if he makes one mistake.
So
Rook a6 is clever. I like that because then you can defend across the 6th rank. That was probably an additional reason for a5, so yeah.
yeah, exactly. But then Vichy plays e5, which seems to be quite nice. You've got this pawn chain from c3 to e5, and it's all pointing towards the black king. So in no way it's supposed to be attacking as white.
Yeah, it covers the d6 and f6 squares as well, which are really important defensive squares. And I think if you look super long term, if you can somehow move the bishop from g2 to like b1, which obviously isn't an easy thing to do, but you have a really long diagonal to play with, and then you can get some, good play with that. But I mean, the simplest plan here, if you gave white some free moves here, it looks like f4, f5, f6, and that looks really strong, because you'd be blocking out the rook on a6, you'd be preventing the knight from going to g7, and you're threatening to bring your own queen to h6 if obviously they took on f6. So it's going to be interesting to see how Magnus holds this. Not that his position is worse, but it's just you can see how cramped he's going to be.
So he plays knight c7, and I guess he's trying to get something working down the queen's side. So here it becomes a lot of choices available for Vishy. I mean, he's only used half an hour compared to Carlsen's over an hour.
That's true.
So it's the first time in the match he's had a significant time advantage, which is, well, it's good for him. And he's got, various options. I mean, perhaps you have to look and see, does Black have enough counterplay to warrant stopping his plans at the moment and try and stop Black's counterplay, or do you just carry on with your kingside attack?
At the moment, I feel like
I mean, b4's coming, right?
Yeah, but at the moment I think we can take that twice, and it's not so much. I will be interested to see how Magnus is defending, whether he's played the knight to c7 in order to enable some kind of, something to e6, like knight e6 or something at some point, along with maybe g6, and then dropping the knight back to g7 that way. But at the same time, that's probably not the most likely, because he could have just played g6 this move instead of knight c7, and that would have saved him a move. So I guess just by that move, it kind of looks like you're right. It looks like he's going to mainly go for counterplay, as opposed to trying to just slowly defend against White's advancing pawns. So it's kind of interesting.
So off he goes, f4. That f pawn is marching.
Yeah.
How are you going to stop it? Or do you care? It appears Carlsen doesn't. He just carries on the b4.
So he is going for the counterplay option. It's not necessarily bad. It is necessarily more risky. Because
I mean, you have to take it, right?
Well, yeah, of course you take with the a pawn, because then you also enable the trade of rooks at some point, which can help defend, it can help attack. Although there is some argument here to playing something other than rook takes rook, maybe rook c, well, maybe rook a to f2 or something to try and push up that f pawn. I think if you play rook, c2, which looks very defensive, you run into the problem of b3, and then actually that pawn can get quite strong. But it's, I don't know, I feel like if you trade rooks and then after knight takes, if we take on b4, knight recaptures, it can put itself on d3, and it can just be generally annoying. And the fact that we have one less pair of rooks, it means that, or it doesn't necessarily lessen our attack, it just means that we've got one less piece to attack with in the future, which was potentially a good piece, because Black's version of that rook was stuck away from his king.
So something like this. I mean, Black has a pass pawn here on c4, and the knight is nicely on d3 and controls just in white space. So perhaps Vishy didn't really want to go into this kind of thing.
Yeah, because I mean he can still play his f5, f6 plan, but I think just queen c7 is pretty natural, and then you're threatening to play c3 at some point, maybe if, when the knight's not hanging. But the rook, I don't know. It feels like you kind of have to divert your attack to, worry about Black's now. So I think if he can avoid this, that would be better.
Yeah. Although the problem with perhaps playing something like this It's just b3, and now that b pawn is strong, and you're going to have to worry about that a lot.
Yeah, if he can just slightly untangle his knight and bishop, and he can get his other rook to b8, I think that could be a big problem. So,
I mean, if you just carry on pushing, I mean, it's unclear. Let's say that.
it's very unclear.
The knight's coming this way.
Yeah, you could play maybe queen a5 or something to threaten c3.
Yeah.
And the problem there is that even if the pawns break through, it's hard for them to break through to the extent that they can mate you. Because if you play f6 and take on g7, you can just play king takes g7, and although you can check, you can just go back. Whereas in the meantime, you know, if you lose the c3 pawn, as soon as the piece is moved away from c3, you get b3, well, b and c pawns passed, and those connected would be pretty devastating. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what Vishy does.
So it does take an a6.
Okay.
Alright, and then he goes for it with f5. Just
okay. So he's kind of risking the b3 move, but I guess his argument is that it's not a real threat at the moment because there's nothing really supporting it, and he thinks his attack is quicker.
And then he goes, Magnus anyway sort of insters out b3 in response. He's not concerned at the moment. And now, after this position, Vishy spends an eternity, literally an eternity. Well, perhaps not literally.
Okay.
And because he's got plenty of options. So what would you do here?
Well, f6 is the most obvious, but combined with f6, we need something else to really push through. So you might want to look at like queen f4, because the idea then is you combine it with f6, and then you can go to h4, and then you go to h6. You could also play rook f4 with the idea of rook h4, and then you again push this f6, and well, maybe that's not so great because your queen can't get there. You could also do some knight h5 with the idea of f6, or even knight h5 with the idea of just, you know, then moving your queen to f4 and h4, and then sacking on g7 or something.
There's a lot of stuff to look at here, which is probably understandable. I mean, even moves like h4 as well.
Yeah, h4, h5. Yeah. The only thing with h4 is, as good as it seems originally, I think actually we kind of want one file to use, like get our pieces in, which is why I was suggesting these something to f4 lines. But yeah, I think h4, h5, h6 would be good if we could get it in. The question is how much time do we really have against black's counterplay? But if, as you said, Anand's taking a long time, you'll be looking at pretty much everything.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know what I'd go for, honestly. There's too much.
Yeah, exactly. Like one of the comments was, it's so many natural moves here for Vishy, and he's got to choose one. It's difficult. So he started off this move with 67 minutes, and
Wow.
After a long time, he plays queen f4.
Yeah, so it's taken like 3/4 of an hour on that move.
Yeah, so I kind of came in just before this move, and well, there's some exciting lines in it. Let's say we can go back after the game and have a look at all different ones.
Okay.
But it's kind of a critical point. So knight c7 in response, because he wants that knight to come back and help defend, essentially.
Yeah, he can go back to e8 if he needs. It also helps support d5, I guess, which is useful side effect.
Yeah, and another point about taking on a6 with the rook is it gets that knight all the way off to the side, and the rook was a good defender, so perhaps this is why he decided to take on a6 first.
Yeah.
So now we have f6.
Okay. So the thing about playing it immediately is he's giving that e6 square to potentially the knight or the bishop. So I might have been thinking about something like queen h4 first or something, but maybe well, I'm sure he does know a lot better than me, since he spent so much time. He'd have been working out all these lines, several moves in advance compared to just the one. So he'll have been planning f6 as the next move, if Magnus play this, which is one of the more obvious moves, because that was his piece most far away from the action.
So, what would you play as black here?
Well, I mean, you can't take, I'm pretty sure, because you're just leaving yourself so open. Because then white would recapture with the g-pawn, and then you'd have moves like queen g5 and knight h5 and so on, which looks very dangerous. So I'd primarily be looking at g6, or I'd be looking at something like knight e8, and potentially recapturing on g7 with the knight. I'm wondering if there's any other way we can get our counterplay going more. Like maybe if we play knight e6, one of the ideas of it could be queen b6 and push the b pawn. But obviously at the moment just rook f1 is covering the b1 square, so maybe it doesn't do so much. We need to... I mean, it makes more sense to worry about the attack that's just about to hit our king than a potential future pawn. So
g6.
Yeah, which seems most obvious. So now we've got to worry about queen h4, h6. So knight e8 will defend against the mate, but it's pretty risky. If we could play queen h6, then rook f4 to rook h4, then we can mate. But then b 2b1. So I don't know. It involves a lot of calculation actually, and Vishy's got 13 minutes left for 13 moves.
Yeah.
So,
well, I imagine this was all calculated out.
Yeah.
In that time period. But he's gone for it. He knows that b2 is coming. That's pretty much.
Okay, so you actually play queen h6. Okay.
This is all played.
Okay, well maybe you don't have to play rook f4. Maybe you can play h4, h5. And it's... Yeah, well, okay, definitely now, because... I'm trying to think what else. You could play knight e2 to f4, maybe, to threaten d5. And then you could push the h-pawn, something like that. But we need to worry about queen b6 next move as well, just threatening to queen. And then after rook b1, you can argue that our attack is really slowing down, and we can't really mate without the rook involved. So that could be an issue. So maybe Magnus has just got everything covered, even though it looks super dangerous. But yeah, as you say, I guess Vishy must have calculated all this, so I can't imagine that he'd allow Magnus to queen, especially how he's given the he's played the match so far, like so safe, even though he's more attacking this game. It's, I mean, I'm just trying to think. Rook f4, b1 queen, bishop f1. Queen d1, maybe? And the idea is that after rook h4 you can play queen h5. I mean, knight takes, but you have to remember that obviously that queen was just a pawn. But maybe just... well, okay, that's probably too far-fetched, so... we'll just continue. So I don't know, maybe knight e2 or h4 is more realistic, and it's yeah, I can't see rook b1 because of queen b6. It's just protecting it, and the queen's not needed in the defense anyway. And once the rook's out of the attack, white's attack isn't so threatening anymore either. So that seems way too passive, and
it's interesting hearing your thoughts as you see it
well,
for the first time.
So probably he's played like I don't know, something completely irrelevant. I mean, you can. I mean, e6 is kind of a common sack in some lines where you can play f6, f7 check as well, but I just don't think it works here because the bishop takes. So I
So
don't know.
what's your move? Guess the move.
Knight e2. Wow.
He's
Really?
gone for it.
Did he actually play that, or did you just do that?
No, he's gone for it. This is what he
Wow.
played.
Okay. Well, I guess he
Of
must.
course,
He must
the
think
idea
it must
is
be a win, right?
Rook f4, Rook h4, and then
Mate on h7.
it's obviously the idea.
So, well, I mean, he must have calculated this to play it, and he played it quite quickly as well. Like, I mean, admittedly, he didn't have so much time, but still, to play this with like a minute or 2 minutes is, implies he's been working it out since
Since he played
Queen f4. Really.
Yeah.
Okay, so, well, obviously Magnus is gonna queen because it's with check.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So now black has 2 queens, and it's just completely crazy. I mean,
so basically he has to stop the mate on h7. That's his main priority. So white has to do something against the check, but then black's future plans are going to be like, well, the only way he can really stop the mate is to put something on h5, like the queen, like I was suggesting, like fire queen d1, or he can play knight takes f6 to delay it 1 move. So I mean, it looks like queen d1 is the only move after bishop f1. I mean, obviously we're playing bishop f1 because if we play like king f2 or something, there's more checks and we can lose c3 and you can push the c pawn as well. If we play knight f1, then you can play queen h5 and you can't play knight takes h5. I mean, maybe he's going to play knight takes f6 at some point, but it seems very desperate and it doesn't seem to really do much because, you can just retake with the g-pawn and the position's the same, essentially.
so here, Fischer plays knight f1.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, so queen d1, maybe his idea is like bishop f3 or something first to stop queen h5. I guess.
Do it on the board.
So I guess his idea is this to stop, because obviously if the queen gets to h5, then we're doing better than before. Because the reason I was saying bishop f1, I didn't really consider this, was because we had knight takes h5 in those lines, whereas here obviously we don't. So maybe this. But then we can do this, and if this, we can just take it. And yeah, we've given the queen for a rook, but that was an extra queen, so really we're just a rook up. Right? Or
Yep.
Maybe I'm missing something, but...
Okay,
well, I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll see what Vichy plays, but I probably missed something.
Queen e1.
Okay, well, immediate queen e1, that works as well, yeah. Same idea.
And Fischer resigns because there's no way to stop it. There's no way to continue because after rook h4, as you said, he just takes it.
Wow.
So he blundered. He blundered with knight f1.
No. Interesting. Did the computer say it was alright after, like, allowing the queen?
Yeah, so I'll show you the critical variation. So
okay, yeah.
Bishop f1, queen
okay,
d1.
That's why I said bishop f1, didn't I?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you got it all right. You got rook h4 in your crazy variation. It's all correct. You got this, and then obviously he has to take.
Mm.
And
so then, I mean, rook takes.
Takes.
Bishop f5. So after, yeah, I'd say bishop f5 here. And then, I guess, g6 or bishop h3. So bishop h3, you can just go back here, maybe. So I don't know. I don't know. So maybe I have to play, like...
then he was like e6.
Oh, right, okay. Oh, yeah. Maybe this now, with the idea that we can take back and I feel like back should hold. If I just take that.
I mean, yeah, this is. I mean, this is fine for black.
Yeah, I mean, he's a pawn up. I don't think he'll win it because white's king's super open, but you know, he's fine.
So that was kind of what they were discussing after the game.
And what happens after g6? Is that not working either?
Yeah, that's what I'm just going to show you now.
Okay.
Oops, so after g6.
So my idea here was that after, obviously bishop takes is the only move again, then you just play rook g5 and h4, h5, but it might be too slow, maybe.
So rook g5, yeah, I mean...
I guess maybe you can just take on f6 again. Maybe.
And you get into a similar kind of thing.
Yeah, because if you play h4 here, I feel like you've got enough time to do this. And the queen has nowhere to go, so he's forced to trade. And although this looks like it's winning the bishop, we can play something like this. So that would be fine for black as well. I can't... Oh, that's a shame. He really went for it as well.
He did, and it was like, no one could believe it after he played knight f1.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't remember what he was. He did some long variation, but he was worried about queen b6 stuff in some lines.
Is that yeah? Well, I was a little worried about queen b6 stuff earlier when we had the pawn. Or did he mean the promoted queen?
I can't remember.
Yeah, wow.
But it was pretty crazy.
So what's that? That's 6-3, right?
6-3.
So
it needs 3. Mames needs half a point.
So Fishy better start winning.
To become world champion.
Wow. That's a crazy game. It's not often you see that. Oh look, he can promote in one move. Let's move my rook out the way.
Let's allow a check, yeah. I
mean, I guess he calculated the whole line after queen f4, which is kind of crazy. But there's no way he could play it as fast after without, you know, having had something previous to rely on. And I guess maybe it is just hard. How long did he spend on knight f1?
He played it pretty quickly, and then he was like, no, he could see it in his face as soon as he played it because they got the webcam on the stream.
That's why I like watching Caspi, because he always showed everything. Yeah, so when I was saying queen d1 and bishop f3, I guess just queen e1 was better because that was just, you know, immediately looking at h4, and same thing.
That is...
But bishop f1 was meant to be pretty fine for white, because you can play knight takes h5. And those are the lines we just looked at, I guess, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, was queen f4 correct? I mean, could you have done something else after on move 23?
I mean, you could have done lots of things, but even... I mean, queen f4 was one of my options as well. And
I mean, I was looking at h4 because I liked it quite a bit. So
what's your plan?
Okay, well, push the pawns.
Okay, so what pawn are you looking to push? Because when you've pushed the h pawn, you have options. You can push h5, h6, you can push h5 then g6, or you can just push f6 still. And it's kind of...
Push h5 and an f6. Because then if he plays g6, I can take with the h pawn.
Okay. And the idea is that if he takes back with the f pawn, you've got to pass to e pawn. And if he takes with the h pawn, you can, you know, play like king f2 and move everything to the h file.
Yeah. So so a sample continuation is, I guess, knight c7. Because it's difficult to work out what they would play in this situation, but
I think knight c7 is pretty reasonable in all positions, just because the knight's so out of play.
So after h5, I mean, what do you do as black? I mean, this is looking pretty scary stuff.
You could try g6, but it's very risky in case you only ever get anything there. So, for example, after this, or even just this, and it's so awkward, but no, actually, I don't think you can play this because you could take on g6, and then you could get the queen to the h file somewhere, and just you'd have an open h file. So maybe you couldn't do that. Maybe instead of g6, you need to do some other break. You could try f6, but then I think this g6 is strong. But maybe h6? Just super blockade it.
Yeah, perhaps that would be
I don't
fine.
know. The idea is that, yeah, we're super cramped and stuff, but maybe b3 is too much of a threat for you to completely ignore. So you always have to keep something towards the defense of it. But I'm not sure. Again, the problem with making a move back then was just that all the options are quite long-winded, and they don't necessarily work together. So it's kind of, pick one or the other.
Yeah. So yeah, let's just do a sample move. 98. I don't know how useful this would be. It probably looks okay. But then you got, what have you got?
Maybe f6, yeah, because that also takes away the g7 square from the knight, but then you can leave the knight there and
take here.
Maybe you have to retake. See, I feel these variations are very risky because the open h file. But you could argue that maybe black can try king h7 and rook h8 and then king back to g8 or something. It's just super. That b3 pawn is. I mean, it looks like nothing, but it is so annoying in terms of white trying to get all its pieces into the attack. I mean, I think in the end, I didn't. I kind of lost my nerve and didn't go for Vishy's move. I went for like knight e2 or something instead, with the idea of knight f4, and that was a much slower plan, but it was potentially much safer. But he probably felt like he needed to go for a risk, and to be honest, he was probably right. This was probably one of his best chances to win, because those pawns were really strong, and I don't know how often he's going to get this type of position against Magnus, because this is the first time he's been able to get this from the 9 games so far.
Yeah. So even something like this move, playing the queen f4 idea, after you got h4, h5 in. I mean, what can you do as black? I mean, you're just shuffling your knight around. You're just waiting for the. You can't get yourself in a better defensive position, really, can you?
Yeah, it's awkward. Maybe just something like this, because then the queen defends along the 6th rank, and it can help support the b pawn.
d5's hanging though.
Oh, okay, yeah. So not that then.
Yeah, you can try like something like this.
Yeah, I feel like though that yeah, okay. Yeah, because we can't take the d5 pawn now because the queen attacks it. So yeah, maybe. Because then you can.
But then I was thinking of something like this.
Yeah, but then again, I also think black doesn't necessarily have to take it, because you can recapture on g7 with a knight. So although it's super awkward.
Well, so if you play like.
Well, not necessarily that, but I might play bishop e6 or something first.
Okay.
Just protect f7. So if we do something like this.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But then again, knight h5, knight f6 check, and we're going to give the knight. So maybe we can. Okay, it's going to get really weird here, but we play something like this. Well, maybe it's not even fast enough because. Oh no, it's probably fine. Because the idea is you can play queen d8 back, and you'll be able to cover queen f8 check. And the other idea is if we have time, we can play rook g8. to help protect G7. So it's awkward, and I agree that black doesn't seem to have many moves, but once white commits to a pawn thrust forwards, his defense will be based upon that. So maybe white can even play slowly after he's got that pawn structure, just to get the rest of his pieces in better position. Even simple move like moving the king somehow to h2 or something, just so it's not going to be checked after b1 or something. But it requires so much analysis. It's yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Pretty crazy. I mean, I did some fantasy variations. Just
okay. Go show it.
Let me see if I can find them in chess space.
Uh-huh.
So it was like I was just doing this kind of stuff, just to make a move.
Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily a bad move either. But well, okay. If you go back, it's probably a
yeah. I mean, it's just wasting moves because you can't really do that much.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you play f6.
I feel like f6 is the best break in most of these lines, just because of how we're taking away squares.
And then there are different ways of doing it. If you play g6, then you're pretty screwed here, because after h takes g6, I mean, you can't take with the h pawn because of queen h4. But I mean, if you do this, you play queen h4, and then, I mean, what can you do here? Because you can just play. If the idea is you play king f2, rook h1, and there's no way of stopping it.
Yeah, because
you play 98. I don't know.
Yeah, and again, that's just going to be you can take on f6 once to delay a move. Well, not even a move, because you can mate on h8 instead.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you can't take with the h pawn. So if you take with the f pawn, you've got f7 check.
Okay.
And I play king h8. Got e6, which is pretty funny.
E6 with the idea queen e5. That's very nice. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Queen e5.
Obviously, you're naturally thinking about queen f6, but if you can play e6 to actually give yourself the extra e5 square, that's pretty. It's pretty funny.
So there's loads of things you have to.
Although you can play knight g7 here, but I imagine it's not good enough because you can just start taking the d pawn and so on. With the
Yeah, you
bishop.
just take d5.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So you can't really play g6. So what about? I mean, this is the kind of thing. Actually, the computers think is alright, and humans think that's just crazy. You're opening up the G.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier that I thought we couldn't do this at some point, just because it looks so risky.
I mean, you can play E takes f7, f6, but then bishop b6, g6, f takes, h takes, h takes, queen g5. But like holds on with queen e8, and everything's kind of defended.
Yeah.
But then white has this move, which is funny, because if he takes it, you got bishop takes e4.
And then there's no real good way to defend against it. Because if bishop f5, we can take it. If bishop f7, what's the idea then? Is it just queen h6 maybe?
Yeah. And then if knight e6, just kick it out of the way.
Crazy.
So this is the kind of game that the World Championship has been needing. Yeah,
definitely the best game, I think.
Unfortunately, for the World Championship's point of view anyway, it's Vishy just made that slight miscalculation. And now he needs 3 wins from 3 games to tie.
So I guess we will be getting a ridiculously fighting game tomorrow from Vishy as black.
Unless he gives up and decides he wants to rating points and then gives quick draws.
No.
Because there's 100 rating points difference, so he gets some elo points. But Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. It'll be interesting to see what he plays. I think it will be much harder with black. I think he tried really well actually, and it's very unfortunate he blundered. But I guess he just spent too long on the queen f4 and planning it out, and he just missed that move. And what can you do?
Yeah, I mean, once you decide, I mean, he calculated a long way through with the bishop f1. He saw bishop f1, obviously, and he didn't see the win. And then, as you do, he's kind of thought, well, what if I play the knight to f1, and then in some of the queen d1 lines, it's okay for him somehow, but it would only be okay if the knight was back on g3 at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it's kind of what all chess players, well, at least definitely me, do, is you imagine the same piece on two different squares, and then when you come to play the variation, you're like, damn it, where's my piece gone? It's on a different square. Yeah. So then it just loses. And
I do that a lot as well, especially on the board, and it's it's just one of those things that happens. It's annoying as well because he was up by half an hour or something earlier on in the game, so he kind of earned that extra time to actually do the thinking. And then I do think we have seen so far that Magnus is just a stronger player, as we can kind of tell by the rating, but also just how the games have gone. He hasn't lost a game yet, even though if Anand would have played perfect, it seems, still those variations weren't winning for Carlsen.
I mean, obviously Carlsen played very well to find the only defensive moves which didn't lose in that thing. But he said it was quite easy for him because when you're playing only moves, then you don't have to think about much, you just play them.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. But I guess we'll leave it there because game 10 is tomorrow.
Which could be the final game.
Well, I think, do they play it out anyway?
I don't know.
I
don't know.
I guess they do.
I don't know. I doubt they would, to be honest.
They might play some exhibition style.
Maybe. So basically, if Magnus just draws tomorrow, he wins.
Yeah.
So Fishy has to win for the match to go on.
With black.
So get ready for I don't know, Sicilian probably. I imagine Magnus will just play e4 again because that's where he's been most comfortable.
Let's play dragon.
Yeah, you could see a dragon, but I don't think Vishy plays many Sicilians. But
I don't know what's the most aggressive opening as black. Probably some kind of
you can play some
gambit.
Latvian gambit with like e5, 2 knight f3, f5, which I've played a couple of times against you, but it's completely terrible.
You need to find some sideline which is pretty aggressive, and then just go ahead and do it. Something which is not analysed so much.
Yeah.
Or some ridiculous sack line.
Well, good luck to him. I would like to see him win, but
yeah, he deserves a one win.
Maybe.
I guess.
If he plays like this again, he does.
Yeah. Alright then, so I guess we will see you tomorrow for Game 10.
See ya.
See you.